In this video, no one is ever so broken that love and forgiveness cannot heal them, whether it means forgiving yourself or someone else.
The king who bled in silence. You know, some stories stay with you forever. This one about a vampire king named Valdric. It changed how I see strength and kindness completely. The castle of Morvain stood at the edge of the Hollow Mountains, where the mist never lifted and the sun rarely touched the ancient stone walls. For 300 years, this fortress had been home to King Valdric, the immortal ruler of the Northern Territories. But tonight, something was terribly wrong within those walls. In the highest tower, behind doors that had not opened for 17 days, the vampire king lay dying. Not from a wooden stake, not from holy water, not from any weapon that legends claimed could destroy his kind. King Valdric was dying from something far more painful, a curse placed upon his heart by a witch he had once shown mercy to. The very mercy that made him different from other vampires had become his death sentence. His advisors had brought healers from every corner of the known world. Sorcerers had chanted over his body for hours. Alchemists had poured rare medicines down his throat. Holy men had prayed, though their presence burned his skin. Nothing worked. The curse continued to spread through his ancient blood like poison through water, slow and unstoppable. Commander Sira, the only human who served directly under the king, stood outside his chamber door each night, listening to sounds that broke her warrior's heart. She had served Valdric for 22 years. She had seen him spare villages when other vampire lords would have destroyed them. She had watched him feed only from willing donors, paying them generously, treating them with dignity. She knew the truth that common folk refused to believe: King Valdric was not a monster. Inside the chamber, Valdric opened his silver eyes and stared at the ceiling he had looked upon for centuries. The pain in his chest was beyond description. It felt as though invisible hands were slowly crushing his heart, squeezing tighter with each passing hour. He could feel his immortal strength fading, his supernatural senses growing dull. The curse was designed to make him feel everything a dying human would feel, and the witch had crafted it with perfect cruelty. 312 years, he whispered to the empty room. His voice, once commanding enough to silence armies, now sounded thin and broken. I have walked this earth for 312 years, and I will die alone in this room, remembered only as a creature to be feared. He thought about the villages under his protection. He thought about the orphanage he had secretly funded for decades, the one that sheltered children who had lost parents to wars and famines. No one knew that the monthly gold deliveries came from the Vampire King himself. He had made certain of that. Monsters were not supposed to care about orphan children. Monsters were not supposed to feel the weight of loneliness that pressed upon him now. A single blood tear rolled down his pale cheek. Vampires did not cry water, they cried blood. And in 3 centuries, Valdric had only cried twice before, once when he was first turned against his will, and once when he buried his human mother, the only person who had ever loved him without fear. Miles away from the castle, in a small village called Thornwick, a woman named Alina was closing the shutters of her modest cottage. She was 34 years old, a widow for 3 years now, and mother to a 7-year-old daughter named Rose. Her husband Marcus had been a woodcutter, a good man with gentle hands and a warm laugh. A falling tree had taken him on an ordinary Tuesday, leaving Alina with a mountain of grief and a child to raise alone. She had no special skills. She could not read or write. She could not cast spells or brew medicines. She was simply a woman who washed clothes for wealthy families and grew vegetables in a small garden behind her cottage. The coins she earned were barely enough to keep bread on the table and a roof over their heads. But Alina possessed something that no healer, sorcerer, or holy man possessed. She carried within her heart an ocean of compassion that had never dried up despite all the suffering life had thrown at her. When neighbors fell ill, she brought them soup. When children lost their way, she guided them home. When stray animals appeared at her door, she shared whatever little food she had. "Mama," Rose called from her small bed in the corner, "why is the sky so red tonight?" Alina looked through the crack in the shutters. Indeed, the sky above the hollow mountains glowed with an unnatural crimson light. The villagers had been whispering about it for weeks. They said the vampire king was dying and his magic was bleeding into the heavens. They said when he finally perished, the land would fall into chaos, fought over by vampire lords far crueler than Valdric had ever been. It is just the clouds, my love, Alina said softly, pulling the thin blanket higher over her daughter's shoulders. Nothing to fear, close your eyes now. But as she spoke these comforting words, Alina felt something strange stir in her chest. A pulling sensation like an invisible thread attached to her heart, tugging her toward those distant mountains. She had felt this sensation before years ago when her husband had been trapped under that fallen tree. She had known somehow that someone needed her. She had run into the forest without thinking, without understanding how she knew where to go. She had arrived too late to save Marcus. That failure haunted her every single night. Now the pulling came again, stronger than before. Someone was suffering, someone was alone, someone needed what she could give, though she did not understand what that was or why she had been chosen to give it. Alina shook her head and turned away from the window. She was a poor widow with a child to protect. She could not go chasing feelings into the mountains where monsters lived. That would be madness. That would be abandoning her daughter for an impossible quest. She lay down beside Rose and closed her eyes, forcing herself to ignore the pulling sensation. But sleep would not come. The thread attached to her heart kept tugging, 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 and somewhere in the distance, through miles of dark forest and misty mountains, King Valdric cried another blood tear without knowing that the only person who could save him was trying desperately to ignore his silent call. 3 days later, the situation inside Castle Morvain had grown desperate. Valdric could no longer stand. He could no longer feed, his body rejecting the blood that had sustained him for centuries. The curse had reached a critical stage, and his advisors gathered in the Great Hall to discuss what would happen when their king finally died. Lord Varen will move against us first, said one advisor, a vampire who had served the castle for a century. He has always wanted these lands. He will show no mercy to the humans under our protection. Then we must prepare defenses, said another. We must. There is no defense without the king, Commander Sira interrupted, her human voice cutting through the immortal debate. You know this. His power maintains the barriers that keep other vampire lords from crossing into this territory. When he dies, those barriers fall, and every monster who feared Valdric will come rushing in to claim what was his. The advisors fell silent. They knew she spoke the truth. Sira continued, her voice heavy with emotion she rarely showed. I have sent riders to every healer in 5 kingdoms. I have spent the king's treasury on cures that did nothing. There is only one option left, and I know you will all think me mad for suggesting it. Speak, said the eldest advisor. Sira took a deep breath. The old texts speak of a healing that comes not from magic or medicine, but from the human heart itself. A pure compassion, freely given, without expectation of reward or fear of consequence. They say such compassion can break curses that nothing else can touch. A fairy tale, scoffed one of the younger vampires. Humans do not possess such power. Perhaps not, Sira admitted, but we have tried everything else. The king has hours, maybe days. I would rather chase a fairy tale than watch him die having done nothing. She did not wait for their response. She turned and walked out of the great hall, knowing exactly what she had to do. Somewhere in the kingdom there might be a human whose heart was pure enough to attempt the impossible, and Sira would find that human, even if she had to search every village from here to the sea. She mounted her horse and rode into the night, carrying with her a desperate hope that logic said was foolish. Meanwhile, in Thornwick, Alina could no longer ignore the pulling in her chest. It had grown so strong that she could not eat, could not sleep, could not focus on her work. Rose had noticed her mother's distraction and asked repeatedly what was wrong. Alina had no answer to give. On the 4th night, she finally made a decision that terrified her. She walked to her neighbor's cottage, an elderly woman named Marta who had helped her through the darkest days after Marcus died. I need to ask you something, Alina said, her voice trembling. Something that will sound like madness. Marta listened as Alina described the pulling sensation, the certainty that someone desperately needed her help, the direction that pointed toward the hollow mountains. When Alina finished, she expected the old woman to tell her she was being foolish, that she should forget this nonsense and focus on her daughter. Instead, Marta reached out and took Alina's hands. I have known you since you were a child, she said quietly. I have watched you give and give and give even when you had nothing left. If your heart is telling you that someone needs you, then someone needs you. Go, I will care for Rose until you return. But the mountains, the vampire king. I know the stories about King Valdric, Marta said. I also know that this village has never once been attacked by vampires, even though we are close to his territory. I know that caravans pass safely through his lands when they would be destroyed elsewhere. Perhaps the stories we tell about monsters are not always true. Perhaps your heart sees something we cannot. Alina embraced the old woman, tears streaming down her face. She packed a small bag with bread and dried fruit, kissed her sleeping daughter's forehead, and stepped out into the night. The crimson glow above the mountains seemed brighter now, pulsing like a dying heartbeat. She began walking toward it, one small woman with no weapons, no magic, no plan, following only the thread attached to her heart. High in his tower, King Valdric felt something change. For a moment, just a moment, the crushing pain in his chest eased slightly. He opened his silver eyes and looked toward the window, toward the distant darkness beyond the mountains. Someone is coming, he whispered, though he did not know how he knew this. Someone is. He could not finish the sentence. The pain returned, worse than before, and he cried out in agony that echoed through the empty halls of his castle. But in that brief moment of relief, he had felt something he had not felt in 300 years. He had felt hope. And somewhere in the night, walking toward him through forests full of danger, Alina felt the thread in her chest pulse with warmth, telling her that whoever waited at the end of her journey was still alive. Still fighting, still waiting for her. She walked faster, not knowing that she was the last hope of a king who had never asked anyone for help, a king who had spent 3 centuries hiding his kindness behind a mask of fear, a king who was about to learn that sometimes the smallest hands carry the greatest power. The forest grew darker around her, the path grew steeper, and far behind her in the village of Thornwick, a rider in dark armor galloped through the streets, searching for exactly the kind of soul that Alina carried within her. They were on paths that would soon cross, and when they did, nothing would ever be the same. The woman who walked into darkness. The forest that surrounded the hollow mountains was not like other forests. Here, the trees grew so close together that their branches wove into a ceiling that blocked all starlight. Here, the fog clung to the ground like a living thing, wrapping around Alina's ankles as she walked. Here, sounds traveled strangely. A snapping twig might echo from 3 directions at once, and silence itself seemed to have weight. Alina had been walking for nearly 6 hours when she first heard the hoofbeats behind her. At first, she thought she was imagining them. Then they grew louder, faster, unmistakable. She stepped off the path and pressed herself against a massive oak tree, making herself as small as possible in the darkness. The horse emerged from the fog like a ghost, black as midnight, breathing clouds of steam into the cold air. Its rider wore dark armor that seemed to absorb what little light existed. For a terrifying moment, Alina was certain she was about to die. She had been foolish to come here. She had been foolish to trust a feeling in her chest. Now she would never see Rose again. But the rider pulled the horse to a stop and removed her helmet, revealing a human face. A woman's face, weathered by years of hard service, but unmistakably human. Her eyes scanned the tree line, searching. I know someone is there, the rider called out. I mean you no harm. My name is Commander Sira, and I serve King Valdric. I am looking for someone with a particular kind of heart. If that is you, please show yourself. If it is not, then continue on your way and forget you ever saw me. Alina hesitated. Every instinct told her to remain hidden, to let this stranger pass, to protect herself. But the thread in her chest pulled so hard that it almost hurt, and it was pulling directly toward this armored woman on the black horse. She stepped out from behind the tree. I am Alina, she said, her voice steadier than she expected. I am nobody important, just a widow from Thornwick, but I think I am supposed to go where you are going. Sira stared at her for a long moment. She had searched 3 villages already, looking for someone who fit the description in the old texts, someone whose compassion was pure, whose heart was unguarded, whose capacity for kindness had survived hardship. She had found good people, certainly, but none whose presence made her feel what she was feeling now. Standing before this simple woman in peasant clothes, Sira felt warmth spreading through her chest. It was like standing near a fire after a long march through snow. It was like coming home after years away. This was the one. She knew it without understanding how she knew it. Get on the horse, Sira said quietly. We do not have much time. They rode through the night, Sira pushing the horse as fast as she dared on the treacherous mountain paths. As they rode, she explained everything to Alina: the curse, the king's hidden kindness, the failure of every healer and sorcerer, the old texts that spoke of compassion as a power stronger than magic. I must be honest with you, Sira said as the castle finally came into view, a dark silhouette against the crimson sky. I do not know if this will work. I do not know if anything can save him now. You may risk your life walking into that castle and you may gain nothing but death for your courage. Do you still wish to try? Alina thought about Rose, waiting in Marta's cottage, not understanding where her mother had gone or why. She thought about Marcus, whom she had failed to save despite running as fast as her legs could carry her. She thought about all the times she had wanted to help someone and had been too late, too weak, too small. I have spent 3 years wishing I had reached my husband sooner, she said quietly. I cannot change that, but I can choose not to let someone else die alone when my heart is telling me I can help. Even if I fail, I will know I tried. That has to be worth something. Sira said nothing, but she felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. In 22 years of serving a vampire king, she had met few humans with Alina's simple courage. Perhaps the old texts were right. Perhaps pure compassion was a kind of magic that scholars had stopped believing in. The castle gates opened as they approached, ancient iron groaning against stone. Vampires lined the entrance hall, their pale faces turning to stare at the human woman who dismounted from Sira's horse. Some of them sneered, some of them looked curious. A few of them looked desperate, hoping against hope that this nobody from a small village could do what their greatest minds had failed to do. This way, Sira said, leading Alina up a spiral staircase that seemed to climb forever. He is in the highest tower. He has not spoken in 2 days. He may not even know you are there. They reached a massive door carved with symbols Alina did not recognize. Sira placed her hand on the iron handle and paused. Whatever you see in there, she said softly, remember that he is not what the stories say. He is just a man who has lived too long and been lonely the entire time. He became a vampire against his will, and he has spent 3 centuries trying to be better than the monster he was forced to become. If anyone deserves saving, it is him. As she pushed the door open, the chamber beyond was enormous, filled with shadows that moved despite the stillness of the air. Candles flickered on every surface, but their light seemed to be swallowed by a deeper darkness that emanated from the center of the room. And there, on a bed carved from black stone, lay King Valdric. Alina had expected a monster. She had expected fangs and claws and red eyes filled with hunger. What she saw instead broke her heart. He looked like a man who had been fighting a battle he could not win. His silver eyes were closed, his pale face twisted in pain even in unconsciousness. His hands resting on his chest were thin and trembling. He looked fragile. He looked afraid. He looked utterly, completely alone. The thread in Alina's chest snapped taut, and she understood finally why she had been pulled across miles of darkness to this place. This was a suffering she recognized. This was a loneliness she knew in her own bones. This was someone who needed not magic, not medicine, but simple human presence, simple human care. She walked to the bed and sat down on its edge, not caring that she was touching the resting place of a vampire king. She reached out and took one of his cold hands in both of her warm ones. I am here, she said softly. I do not know if you can hear me, but I am here. You are not alone anymore. Behind her, Sira watched with held breath. The advisors who had followed them up the stairs crowded in the doorway, skeptical and silent. Nothing happened. Valdric did not stir. The crimson glow outside the window continued to pulse with his weakening heartbeat. But Alina did not let go. She held his hand and began to speak, telling him about her village, about her daughter, about the husband she had lost. She told him about the garden she tended and the way Rose laughed when butterflies landed on her fingers. She told him about the pulling sensation that had led her here and how she had almost ignored it and how she was glad now that she had not. She spoke to him like he was a friend she had known for years. She spoke to him like he mattered. She spoke to him like his life had value beyond his power, beyond his kingdom, beyond anything he could offer in return. An hour passed, then two. Sira brought her water, but Alina barely paused to drink. The advisors drifted away, convinced the human woman was wasting the final hours of their king's life. Only Sira remained, standing guard, watching, hoping. Near dawn, when Alina's voice had grown hoarse and her eyes heavy with exhaustion, something changed. Valdrick's hand, which had been cold as marble, began to warm, just slightly, just enough that Alina noticed. She stopped speaking and leaned closer, searching his face for any sign of consciousness. And then, slowly, painfully, his silver eyes opened. He looked at her, this stranger sitting beside his deathbed, holding his hand, treating him like a person instead of a monster. And for the first time in 300 years, King Valdrick did not know what to say. Who, he managed, his voice a ruined whisper. Who are you? Alina smiled, and even though she was exhausted and frightened and far from home, her smile was genuine. I am Alina, she said, and I think I was supposed to find you. His eyes searched her face, looking for deception, for fear, for the disgust he was accustomed to seeing in human eyes. He found none of it. He found only warmth, only compassion, only the kind of acceptance he had stopped believing existed in the world. A blood tear rolled down his cheek. You should run, he whispered. I am a monster, I am. You are dying, Alina said gently. And no one should die alone. Whatever you are, whatever you have done, I am here, I am staying. Let me help you, please. The curse in his chest tightened, sensing a threat, trying to push her away with a wave of cold that filled the room. But Alina did not release his hand. She shivered, but she held on. She was terrified, but she did not let go. And somewhere deep inside King Valdrick, in a place the curse had not yet reached, something began to flicker. It was not magic, it was not power. It was something far more dangerous to the darkness that was killing him. It was hope. For 3 days, Alina did not leave the king's chamber. Sira brought her food and water. Marta's face appeared in her thoughts, caring for Rose, trusting that Alina would return. But she could not leave. Every time she tried to step away, even for a moment, Valdrick's condition worsened. The curse was fighting against her presence, trying to complete its work before she could stop it. On the second day, Valdrick was conscious enough to speak in full sentences. He told her about his human life centuries ago when he had been a farmer's son who dreamed of traveling the world. He told her about the vampire who had attacked him in the night, turning him against his will, destroying everything he had ever known. He told her about the decades of rage that followed, the terrible things he had done before he learned to control his hunger. I built this kingdom to atone, he said, his silver eyes fixed on the ceiling. I protected humans because I had once destroyed them. I showed mercy because I knew what it felt like to receive none, but it was never enough, it will never be enough. Perhaps, Alina said softly, atonement is not about being enough. Perhaps it is about trying anyway. He turned to look at her, and for a moment his ancient eyes looked young, lost, hopeful. Why did you come here, truly? You have a daughter, you have a life. Why risk everything for a stranger? Alina considered the question carefully before answering. Because I know what it feels like to suffer alone, she finally said. After my husband died, I thought I would never feel warm again, but people came, neighbors brought food, friends held my hands. They did not fix my pain, but they made it bearable. They reminded me that I was not invisible. She squeezed his cold hand gently. You have been invisible for 300 years. Someone should have come sooner. Valdrick closed his eyes, and for a long moment he did not speak. When he finally opened them again, there was something different in his gaze, something softer, something breaking. I do not deserve your kindness, he whispered. No one deserves kindness, Alina replied. That is what makes it kindness. On the third day, something extraordinary happened. The curse, which had been slowly crushing Valdric's heart, began to crack, not because of any spell, not because of any medicine. It cracked because it had been built on the assumption that no one would ever care for the vampire king. The witch who had created it believed that his mercy would be his downfall, that showing compassion would earn him nothing but betrayal and loneliness. She had been wrong. Alina's presence, her genuine warmth, her refusal to see him as a monster, these things were not supposed to exist in the witch's understanding of the world. And so the curse, built on a foundation of cynicism, could not withstand the simple truth of human compassion. The crimson glow outside the window began to fade. Valdric felt the crushing pressure in his chest ease bit by bit, like ice melting in spring. He took a full breath for the first time in weeks and felt tears streaming down his face, not blood tears this time, but something closer to the tears he had cried when he was still human. "It is working," Sira breathed from the doorway. "By all the ancient powers, it is actually working." But Valdric did not hear her. He was looking at Alina, at this ordinary woman who had done what no sorcerer or healer could do. She had seen his humanity when he had forgotten he had any. "Thank you," he said, his voice stronger now. "Thank you for not looking away." Alina smiled, exhaustion clear on her face but warmth still shining in her eyes. "You are welcome," she said simply. "Now rest, you are not finished healing yet." She did not know how right she was. The curse was cracking, yes, but it was not yet broken. And the witch who had created it was about to learn that her masterpiece was failing. In a dark cave miles away, a woman with eyes like burning coal felt her spell weakening. She screamed with rage and began preparing something far worse, a final strike that would destroy not just the vampire king, but everyone who had dared to defy her curse. She would come for Alina. She would come for Valdric. And she would not show mercy to witch's fury. The cave where the witch Morvenna made her home was carved into the base of a dead mountain, far from any village or road. No plants grew near its entrance. No animals dared to venture close. Even the wind seemed to avoid this place, leaving the air stale and heavy with the smell of old magic. Inside, Morvenna paced before a fire that burned without wood, her ancient face twisted with rage. For 17 years she had waited for King Valdric to die. For 17 years she had fed her curse with her own hatred, making it stronger with each passing day. She had watched through dark mirrors as healer after healer failed, as hope drained from the vampire king's silver eyes as he prepared to meet the death she had designed for him. And now, impossibly, a peasant woman was unraveling her masterpiece. Compassion, Morvenna spat the word like poison. She thinks she can defeat me with compassion. She thinks holding a monster's hand will save him from what I have created. She waved her hand over the fire, and the flames shifted to show Alina sitting beside Valdric's bed, speaking softly, her hands wrapped around his. The curse was visible as black veins spreading across Valdric's chest, but those veins were receding. Slowly, steadily receding. "I showed him mercy once," Morvenna hissed at the image. "I was wounded, dying alone in the forest. Any other vampire lord would have killed me for trespassing in his territory, but Valdric carried me to a healer. Valdric gave me blood from his own wrist to strengthen me. Valdric let me go free." She clenched her fists and the fire flared. "And I hated him for it. I hated him for making me grateful to a monster. I hated him for proving that vampires could be kind. He made my entire life's work meaningless. Every spell I ever cast against vampires, every curse I ever designed, all of it was built on the belief that they were pure evil. He destroyed that belief with one act of mercy." The fire showed Alina laughing at something Valdric had said. The vampire king was smiling, actually smiling, and his silver eyes held light that had not been there before. "So I will destroy him," Morvenna decided, "and I will destroy her, and I will prove once and for all that kindness is weakness, that mercy leads only to death." She began to chant in a language older than kingdoms, her voice rising and falling in patterns that made the cave walls shudder. The fire twisted and grew, taking the shape of something terrible, a creature of shadow and flame, held together by nothing but hatred and dark magic. "Go," she commanded the creature. Find the vampire king, find the woman who thinks she can save him, and bring me their hearts." The creature launched itself from the fire and streaked out of the cave like a comet of darkness, moving faster than any horse could run, straight toward Castle Morvain. Inside the castle, Alina had finally allowed herself to sleep. Valdric had insisted, pointing out that she had been awake for nearly 3 days and was in danger of collapsing. She had protested, but her body had overruled her, and she had fallen asleep in the chair beside his bed with her hand still resting near his. Valdric watched her sleep, something strange and unfamiliar stirring in his chest. He had lived for over 3 centuries. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched countless humans pass through their brief lives like flames flickering in the wind, but he had never met anyone like Alina. She was not beautiful in the way that queens and princesses were beautiful. Her hands were rough from years of hard work. Her clothes were simple and worn. She had no power, no wealth, no influence. She was exactly the kind of person that the world overlooked, that history would never remember. And yet she had walked alone through a dark forest, following nothing but a feeling in her heart to save someone she had never met. She had sat beside a vampire's deathbed and spoken to him like he was human. She had held his hand while a curse tried to kill him and refused to let go. Valdric did not understand it. He was not sure he deserved it, but he was grateful for it in a way that made his ancient heart ache. He reached out and gently moved a strand of hair from her face, careful not to wake her. Her skin was warm against his cold fingers. Human warmth. He had forgotten how precious it was. "I will protect you," he whispered. "Whatever comes, I will protect you." He did not know that something was already coming. He did not sense the creature of shadow and flame hurtling toward his castle. His powers, still weakened by the curse, failed to detect the danger until it was almost too late. The warning came not from Valdric, but from Alina herself. She woke suddenly, gasping, her hand flying to her chest. The thread that had led her to the castle was vibrating with alarm, with terror, with a warning she could not ignore. "Something is coming," she said, her voice shaking. "Something bad, something very, very bad." Before Valdric could respond, the entire castle shuddered. Screams echoed from the lower floors. The candles in the chamber flickered and died, plunging them into darkness that even vampire eyes could barely penetrate. And then the door exploded. The creature of shadow and flame filled the doorway, its form constantly shifting, its eyes burning with the same coal fire rage as its creator. It looked at Alina and Valdric, and something like a smile twisted across its shadowy face. "The witch sends her regards," it said in a voice like bones breaking. "She wanted me to tell you that kindness is weakness, mercy is death, and you will both burn for daring to prove her wrong." It launched itself at them, claws of darkness extended, mouth open in a scream of hatred. But Valdric was not dead yet. With strength he should not have had, he threw himself in front of Alina, shielding her body with his own. The creature's claws struck his back, tearing through fabric and flesh, sending waves of agony through his already weakened body. He felt the curse flare in response, trying to finish what it had started, trying to use this moment of weakness to crush his heart entirely. He fell to his knees, black blood pouring from wounds that should have been fatal. Alina screamed his name and caught him before he could collapse completely. "Run," he gasped. "Alina, run, save yourself." "No," her voice was firm despite the terror in her eyes. "I did not come all this way to watch you die. I am not leaving." The creature laughed, a horrible sound that filled the chamber with despair. "How touching. The peasant woman thinks she can protect a vampire king. Let me show you what your compassion is worth." It raised a claw for the killing blow. And something happened that no one expected. Alina stood up, placing herself between the creature and Valdric. She had no weapons, she had no magic, she had nothing but herself. But she stood there anyway, her arms spread wide, her body shielding the vampire king just as he had shielded her. "You will not touch him," she said, and though her voice trembled, it did not break. "He spent 300 years trying to be better than what he was made to be. He protected people when he could have destroyed them. He showed mercy when he had every reason to be cruel. That matters. It matters more than any curse, more than any witch, more than you. The creature hesitated, just for a moment, just long enough. Because Alina's words were not just words, they were truth spoken with conviction. They were compassion given form and voice, and the creature, being made of hatred, could not comprehend them. It was like trying to grab smoke. Her certainty slipped through its claws, confusing it, weakening it. What is this? It snarled. What are you? I am a mother, Alina said simply. I am a widow, I am nobody special, but I am not afraid of you, and I am not moving. Behind her, Valdric felt something shift in his chest. The curse, which had flared in response to his injuries, began to crack further. Not just crack, shatter. Alina's words, her defiance, her refusal to abandon him even in the face of certain death, these things were more powerful than any magic the witch had ever created. He rose to his feet, wounds still bleeding but strength returning. His silver eyes began to glow with power that had been dormant for weeks. The creature turned toward him, sensing the change, and for the first time, fear flickered in its burning gaze. You cannot kill what refuses to die, Valdric said, his voice echoing with ancient authority. And you cannot destroy hope when there is someone willing to stand for it. He raised his hand, and light exploded from his palm, not darkness, not shadow, but pure brilliant light. It struck the creature, and it screamed, its form dissolving, the hatred that held it together unable to withstand the power of a king who had finally found something worth fighting for. The creature vanished, the shadows retreated, and Alina collapsed into Valdric's arms, exhausted beyond measure, trembling but alive. You stood in front of me, Valdric said, disbelief coloring his voice. You protected me. Why, you could have died. Alina looked up at him, and despite everything, she smiled. Because that is what you do for people you care about, she said, even if they are vampire kings. The curse shattered completely that night. Valdric felt it happen, like chains breaking, like a weight lifting, like taking a breath after being underwater for too long. The black veins receded from his chest and disappeared entirely. The weakness that had plagued him for weeks melted away. He was whole again. But he was also changed. 3 centuries of loneliness had built walls around his heart. Alina had walked through those walls like they did not exist. She had seen him at his weakest and had not looked away. She had protected him when she had every reason to run. And now, standing in the ruins of his chamber with dawn light streaming through the shattered windows, he did not know how to let her go. You should return to your daughter, he said, the words painful in his throat. You have done more for me than I could ever repay. I will have Sira escort you safely back to your village. I will send gold enough for you and Rose to live comfortably for the rest of your lives. I. Is that what you want? Alina interrupted quietly. For me to go. Valdric closed his eyes. What he wanted was impossible. What he wanted was selfish. What he wanted was for her to stay, to continue sitting beside him, to keep talking about gardens and butterflies and all the small, beautiful things he had forgotten existed. What I want does not matter, he said. It matters to me. He opened his eyes and found her watching him with an expression he could not read. Not fear, not pity, something else. Something that made his ancient heart beat faster than it had in centuries. The witch is still out there, Alina said. She sent that creature, she will send something else, and you said the curse is broken, but you are still recovering your strength. You need. She hesitated, then continued with determination. You need someone to remind you why you fight. You need someone who sees you, not the monster the stories describe. I could be that person if you want me to stay. And your daughter. Bring her here. Alina's eyes were bright with tears and hope. Let her grow up knowing that vampires can be kind. Let her see that courage means standing for what is right even when you are afraid. Let her have what I never had, a home that is protected, where she never has to worry about where the next meal will come from. You would trust me with your child. Valdric's voice was barely a whisper. You would bring her into a castle full of vampires. Alina reached out and took his hand, the same gesture that had begun her healing of him. I would trust you with my life, she said. I already have, and Rose would be lucky to know you, Valdric. You are the kindest monster I have ever met." He laughed despite himself, actually laughed, and the sound surprised him. He could not remember the last time he had laughed. "Very well," he said, "but I must ask something in return." Anything. Stay not because I command it, not because you feel obligated. Stay because you want to, stay because perhaps we could be friends. Perhaps after 300 years I could learn what it feels like to have a friend. Alina squeezed his hand and smiled. "I would like that," she said. "I would like that very much." But even as they spoke, even as the dawn brought light and hope to Castle Morvain, darkness was gathering in the dead mountain. Morvenna had felt her creature die, she had felt her curse shatter, and she had felt something she had not experienced in centuries: fear. The vampire king was stronger now than he had ever been. The compassion that was supposed to be his weakness had become his greatest strength, and it was all because of one ordinary woman who had refused to look away. "Very well," Morvenna whispered to herself. "If compassion is her weapon, then compassion will be her downfall." She began to weave a new spell, one far more terrible than the curse. She would not attack Valdric directly. She would not send more creatures of shadow. Instead, she would strike at the heart